Question. Thank you. I would like to know your journey towards healing. Please give a list of the psychological therapies that led to your healing and freedom. I work in psychiatry and psychology and would like to go through them for myself and others. Well, yeah, I can easily give a list, but they're not going to be what you would call recognized therapies for the psychological profession. At least not all of them. Some of them are. So in terms of the recognized therapies, in the early 1990s, I started focusing more on healing my psychology, and I found a psychologist who was a licensed psychologist in the United States, but she also had a spiritual outlook on life. And she had many years of experience with practice. But because she had a spiritual outlook, our talk therapy, we did regular talk therapy sometimes, and it had a spiritual slant. So it wasn't the traditional therapy, you could say, because we were always focused on resolving my psychology. It wasn't just me who sat there and talked. We were really focused on resolving specific issues. So she also, with her, I also did Gestalt therapy, which when you're a professional you know what that is, but for me it was especially helpful that I did it with my father. So the empty chair, there was my father sitting there, and I was now telling my father what I never told him. Then I switched chairs and I responded as I thought my father would have responded. And that was very helpful to me because it helped me sort of get over the hang-ups I had with my father, who really wasn't very good at having conversations about psychology. I'm sure there are not many people who recognize that, right? So, so that was talk therapy, Gestalt, and then we did EMDR, eye movement, reprocessing and desensitizing. No, desensitizing and reprocessing, EMDR. And at the time, this was a very new and experimental, this was in the early 1990s, as I said, an experimental therapy that wasn't really generally recognized. I think it has become probably more used today by psychologists. But again, this was very helpful to me. And the idea is that the therapist moves the hand and your eyes follow the hand movements in different ways, and this accesses repressed memories. And it actually worked for me. Then later I used something called hypnotherapy, which is an unfortunate name because you're not in a state of trance. You're not put under hypnosis. But it's a guided meditation where you can step back and access memories, even memories from past lives. And so that was also helpful to me. But in order to understand why all of these therapies were helpful to me, you have to look at it in the context that I've always been a spiritual person, and I have studied spiritual teachings and practiced spiritual techniques. And so the first spiritual tool I used was meditation, which had a positive effect. But later I found this tool of invoking spiritual light from the Ascended Masters that I talk about in many of my videos. And for me, that was much more efficient. So that was very important for me. And the reason why it's important is that the way I look at this is your psychology, your mind, is an energy field. And in that energy field is stored lower energies, fear-based energies. And they have a pull on your conscious mind. So let's just take a simple example. You have a tendency to become angry when things don't go your way. That's because in your subconscious mind, in your energy field, is stored this energy of anger. It has a vibration of anger, specific vibration. just like all energy has a certain frequency, wavelength, and so forth. So this anger, the more anger energy you have in your subconscious mind, the more it pulls you on your conscious mind. And therefore, you can't stop yourself from being angry. You're not making a choice to be angry. You're just reacting. It's what I call a reactionary pattern or subconscious self. And by invoking spiritual light, directing it into that energy, you can transform the energy. Because this is just wave dynamics from science. You take an energy wave with a lower vibration, direct a higher vibrational energy at it, and you can raise the vibration of the lower energy. So to me, this has been tremendously helpful to do this, because it doesn't resolve anything in itself, but it removes the energy. That it's like an energy veil that prevents you from seeing the underlying mechanism, which is what I now call a subconscious self. And so, you know, all of these outer therapies were definitely helpful to me, and especially at the time I did it. But what has been much more helpful to me is these teachings from the Ascended Masters about the subconscious selves that we have in our subconscious mind. And the subconscious self it's not a conscious, self-conscious entity, but it has a certain survival instinct, and that's why it wants to pull us into the self. So we are experiencing life through the self. And the self forms sort of a filter, perception filter. And part of that self is the energy, and part of it is some kind of illusion. Like, for example, when things don't go my way, it's the only way to react is to be angry. It's just one very simple example. There are many more sophisticated selves. But so you have to come to that point where you are, first of all, resolve the energy. So you can look at the self and you can say, is it really logical that the only way to react is to be angry? And does it actually help me to be angry? No, it doesn't. So I'm letting the self die. And you can come to a point where, yeah, things don't go your way, but you don't become angry. You can also say there's another self that has an expectation that things should always go your way. And you can come to question that and say, why do I, on a planet like Earth where there's so much chaos, why do I expect that things should always go my way? Is that a constructive expectation to have? So this thing about the subconscious selves, this has been the most helpful form of therapy I have ever encountered in my 48 years of working on myself. And there's, of course, a whole teaching behind this, which I've talked about in many of my videos, actually, and also in some of my books. And so this has been extremely helpful to me. But beyond that, of course, is the whole spiritual outlook, which is basically self-discovery. I mean, who are you? What kind of being are you? Am I really a human being who's defined by all of these outer characteristics, defined by these roles that I was brought up to play as I was growing up? Or am I a spiritual being who can master my own mind? I mean, basically, you could say that the reason why the different therapies that I used worked for me was that I've always had this basic outlook that my psychology is not set in stone. It's not defined by my genetic inheritance or by my upbringing. It's not my brain that's creating my psychology. My mind is independent of the brain, at least part of it. It, of course, is very tightly connected to the brain, but it's more than the brain. And that means I, as a conscious being, can take command over my psychology. I can resolve the hang-ups that I have created. And again, you can't really separate my approach to therapy from the fact that I accept reincarnation, because I look back at my childhood and I had a fairly easy childhood compared to many spiritual people I met. But when I started working on my psychology, I discovered some very deep traumas that definitely could not be explained by what happened in my childhood. And the only logical explanation to me is that I acquired these traumas in past lives. Look at the history of this planet and see how many traumatic situations we could have been exposed to. War and murder and mayhem. And this has also been intricate. So really, my approach to therapy has been based on this, that I have a long history of creating a very complex psychology, but I can overcome it systematically by taking these steps. And really, in the end, it's a matter of realizing I am not my physical body, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not even my deeper sense of identity. I am a spiritual being. That's who I am. And so my goal has always been to connect to who I really am and to resolve everything in the outer psychology that stands in the way of that oneness with my higher self. And this, of course, is way, way beyond traditional psychiatry and psychology. I don't think it will remain way beyond, because I think in the coming decades, psychology is going to be expanded greatly and incorporate many of these ideas. Not necessarily the ideas I'm talking about here, and not knowledge of ascended masters, but many of these ideas, because what you see in the world today is very simple. More and more people are willing to work on themselves and their psychology. And many of these people go to traditional psychologists or even psychiatrists, and they realize, number one, pills are not going to do it for them. Number two, traditional talk therapy isn't going to do it for them. So if psychologists and psychiatrists want to survive in the marketplace, they're going to have to improve what they offer so that it actually helps people. Otherwise, alternative therapies are going to replace them. So we'll see what happens there. Otherwise, I predict that there will be new approaches to helping people with their psychology that will spring up, and psychiatrists and psychologists are just going to left behind in the dustbin of history.